Everyone okay now? Yeah. Well, welcome to everyone from YAM, Shropshire and Telford and Kent Community Energy. I know some of you we've met before, and others we've exchanged emails and spoken on the phone. So thanks for coming along today. I'm here in my attic office in Wiltshire, where it's boiling hot, and I'm sure I hope the weather's pretty good the rest of the UK, and you'd probably all rather be in the garden. But anyway, let's kick it off. First of all, a little bit about me. I run a PR and communications consultancy specialising in renewable energy. I'm now in my 7th year. My background was originally as a journalist for Reuters Television. Then I went to work for Good Energy, where I was their head of PR and comms. That was where I learned the renewable energy trade, if you like. I've got quite a lot of experience of working with other community energy groups, and you can see the sorts of range of projects that I worked on, not just on solar, but on wind and biomass and a range of other things, but probably most of my experience is on the solar side. Just a quick word about how we're going to structure the webinar today. I've written it into four sections, and we'll have a chance to pause between each section for questions. So please, if you want to type your questions into the chat box, Graham will be monitoring those, and we can cover them in the little breaks that I've allowed for in the presentation. And Graham, I expect if anyone wants to speak their question instead of typing it in, I'm sure that will be fine as well. But basically, we're going to look initially at how you develop a comms strategy, then a bit more about website and social media, more about PR, and then looking at the other elements that you might look for as part of your comms strategy, such as newsletters, the offer document, events, and so on. So first up, what is a comms strategy? Well, like any kind of business, you really have to have a strategy to know that you are going where you want to go and how you're going to get there. And if you're trying to raise finance for a share offer, that's particularly important. And most of these points are common to any kind of business strategy, which is, first of all, you have to decide what your objectives are. Now, I'm going to go through all of the things on this list in more detail as we go on. So, but we'll be looking at your objectives, how you identify your market, the channels you might use to communicate with them, a little bit about branding, talk about key messages, other people's roles and responsibilities, and the other really important thing that is common to all businesses is setting a budget that will allow you to meet your objectives. So you might think that your first objective, if you're launching a community investment, is to raise lots and lots of cash. Well, of course, that is the ultimate objective, but you may have other things in mind. For example, you might want to recruit more people to help share out the tasks of running the community energy business. You might want to ensure that you attract a diverse and wide range of different investors, different age groups, and different professional skills, and so on. So it's not purely about the money. Some of you in this picture, I think, are on this call. This is a good sort of general idea to what you might be looking at this stage before your share offers go live, and that is an objective to build a community of like-minded people who will become members of the community energy group and go on to invest. And a while ago, I did some work with YAM Community Energy, and we translated that into this particular message for their group, which was to raise the profile of YAM and the upcoming investment opportunity locally, so that we could attract lots more supporters, so that when the share offer or bond offer launches, you already have a well-engaged pool of investors to draw on. So first thing is to know your market. Now, obviously, you're going to be looking to get as much local investment as you can. That doesn't just need to be people who live in the area. It can be local businesses, local community groups. They all are different groups which you want to make sure that you understand how to identify them and how to communicate with them. And then also you have to have a think about how you're going to define local. Is it the people in your nearest town? Is it the people in your county? Is it the people in your county and the neighbouring counties? If you're in Devon, is it the people in the whole of the southwest? It's quite important to give that some careful thought, because that's going to affect your PR and media strategy later. It's unlikely that you'll be able to raise the full amounts of your investments, and it's also, you may not want to just raise them from local people without casting your net a bit wider. So you need to make sure that your strategy encompasses how you're going to attract people from outside the local area to invest. And that might be people who like to invest in ethical projects, people who support renewable energy, people who campaign about climate change, and so on. So one of the questions we had submitted before the webinar was what is a typical investor in a community energy project? And as I say, it's really important that you understand your local demographic to see how much investment you're going to get from local people and how much further afield you're going to cast your net. About an average investment is about £2,000. This will vary again on how affluent your local demographic is, but that's been pretty much my experience on most of the community energy projects that I've worked on. They are older, a little bit older, my age, and someone once said to me that the typical investor in a community energy project is a retired professor who reads The Guardian. They do slightly more tend to be male, and you can probably expect to get about 60% of your investment from the local area and 40% from further afield. But just because that's the typical investor doesn't mean that you shouldn't be targeting a much wider group of people, particularly since this is a community energy project. Really, you want ideally your investors to represent the community where you are. So it needs to be, first of all, inclusive. You don't want to rule people out who may only have small amounts of money to invest. So you need to make it clear that the whatever the minimum investment is, and that will probably depend on what sort of product you choose and which investment platform you choose to use to go with that. And you want to make sure that it's as diverse as possible. You want to be across a wide range of age groups, try and get as many different people involved as you possibly can. And your communication strategy needs to focus on that. So these are the different ways that you have of reaching that target market. Now, the reason I've put in a photograph here of people looking at their phones is because nowadays looking at a phone is probably going to be the way most people hear about you, engage with you, and it's really important that all your communications are mobile phone friendly. And I think that's something that it's quite easy to forget. So your website has to look good on a phone. People check their social media on the phone all the time. If you're getting articles written about you in the local paper, it's quite likely that someone's going to read it on their phone rather than picking up a copy of the local paper, particularly at the moment when people aren't really sort of going out to the shops very much or as much as they used to. The offer document obviously is going to be an absolutely key way of communicating with your audience. E-newsletters are another way, and I'll go on later in the webinar to explain about how you should run an e-news strategy and campaign. The other really important way of attracting investors is through your investment platform. Now, we don't yet know, I think, what's going to be recommended by CORE for the different groups. but each investment platform has different characteristics, and they all do different levels of marketing. And if you're making a choice of investment platform, one of the things you need to ask them is, how many subscribers have they got already signed up? Because they're going to be the first people that will invest in your project. And how much marketing do they do, and how much marketing do they expect you to do? So, for example, a company that I work with a lot is Abundance. They do a great deal of marketing on behalf of the projects that they have on their platform. Crowdfunder, you're very much left to do it yourself. They have a large number of people who get their emails for every time there's a new investment, but they have so many new investments coming up every day, every week, that it's hard to make yours stand out among all the sort of general noise. So I think it's really important that when you're deciding which platform to use, you ask them those kinds of questions. And FX is the other one, which is very well established in this space. And again, I'm not sure what the number of subscribers is up to on FX now, but it's important to find that out when you're initially discussing with them. Then you may use other more traditional forms of communication, like leaflets and posters, and holding events, although that's not quite so easy at the moment. Again, I'll come on to that a bit later on in the webinar. Key messages. So you've probably heard of the idea of key messages. This is really a way of organizing your thoughts and getting across what you want your potential investors to understand about your project. Now, on the left-hand side of this slide, I've listed some of the sort of current favorites at the moment, which I should have put Build Back Better at the top of the list, because that's the one that everyone is talking about at the moment. And that's absolutely something that is a really good thing to start communicating straight away to people, which is this: participating in a project like this is a way of putting your money directly to help to build back a better world after coronavirus, post-pandemic. And this is something that we've now seen from, multinational politicians right down to sort of local community level. It's a really important and strong message. But there may be other secondary messages about control, about local impact, about how you're making a difference locally through the Community Benefit Fund, and these will be very much specific to your own particular group. If you've got anything unique or unusual about your project, then you need to make sure that that gets reflected in your key messages. So this is an example that I've taken from YAM Community Energy, and this shows some analysis that they did, which again helps with their communications, which looks at how much electricity their projects would generate, how many homes that would supply, and how much carbon dioxide was being saved every year. And very helpfully, they've translated that into the weight of single decker buses, which is a good way of making it real and easy to understand for the layperson. Another thing that's unique to YAM is that one of their solar farms is the first solar farm to be built off post-subsidy. So that's another really strong message that you would want to put out there. That would be one of your key messages. And for each project, if there's something interesting, different, original about it, try and identify that and build that into your messaging framework. And it's really important to write these messages down somewhere to make sure that everyone in the group knows what they are. If they don't know them, if they know how to find them, so that you keep saying the same things over and over again. And you need to use the key messages in all your communications. You need to make sure that a press release reflects the key messages. You need to make sure that they're there on your website. You need to make sure that they're in your social media, in your newsletters. And that's why it's always helpful, if you're writing anything, to have a quick look back at your reference document and say, well, have I talked about building back better, or have I talked about how much carbon we're going to save, or did I actually mention that we are the first post-subsidy solar farm in the UK, community solar farm? So it's really important, so that, because the more you hammer it home, the more effective your strategy will be. The other thing it's really important to get right, I think, is branding. Now, branding isn't, for some businesses, it's the be all and end all. A community energy group doesn't have to have this strong brand of Coca-Cola or Nike, or even, one of my favorite brands is John Lewis, and I think they're really good at making you trust them. But you need to make sure that you are giving people confidence to invest. You're going to be asking people to give you quite a lot of money, and they need to feel that you are professional, well organized, and will look after their money properly. And that really starts with looking professional in all your communications. So that means you need a good logo. You need to use consistent fonts on all your communications. You need to decide what your brand colors are going to be, and you need to use them consistently on everything. And this is somewhere I think it's always helpful to get some professional design advice. And there are lots of very good freelance design people throughout the country who I'm sure are only too happy to help give you some advice about it. If they don't want to do it for free, then it's worth a small amount of budget to pay for that. And you need to make absolutely sure that everything you send out has got a little bit of branding consistently on it. Obviously, the website's the first thing, but you need it on your Twitter, on your Facebook. If you create a download document for investors, you need to make sure that's got at least minimum your logo on it and is written in the same font that you use consistently throughout all your other communications. I don't think you need to pay money to have someone do a really sophisticated set of brand guidelines for you, and the costs can really mount up if you do that, and you will get some design agencies who will see it as an opportunity to try and sell you a lot of stuff that you really don't need. But just do get a logo done professionally. Ask them for advice about fonts and ask them for advice about which colours to use. The other thing that you need to decide is the roles and responsibilities that everybody is going to have. So the key role for dealing with PR and comms is who is your spokesperson or spokespeople going to be. Ideally, you need two people who can talk to the press, because if one's away, then you can call on the other one. You don't have to have had media training to do this, but if someone is experienced and confident and able to deal with a radio interview, then that's great. Radio can be quite challenging because often a radio interview will be live. You will almost never be asked to do a live television interview, because most of what community energy groups tend to do tends to be local TV, and it's pre-recorded. So that's not as difficult. I'm always happy to give people pointers if they want a few ideas and about how to look at the camera and so on. But in a way, television is easier because you can do it as many times as you want. But with radio, it is live, so you do need to have your wits about you. And almost invariably, they want you to come on the radio at about 6:30 in the morning, which used to be quite good because that was drive time. But I think possibly people's listening habits have changed a little bit. But the people who are not necessarily going to be the actual spokespeople for the group, that doesn't mean that they've got nothing to do. It's important that, you know, you have someone who's going to take on responsibility for the website, someone else, or could be the same person, who's going to deal with the social media, and someone else who will perhaps deal with newsletters. And you obviously all need to talk to each other. So how much should you spend? Well, how long is a piece of string? 10% is probably about right. You shouldn't really be going over that, but that doesn't just include your PR and comms. That could include other things like legal advice. So it's really important to find local people in the community who can help you, who might have some of these skills and who are happy to do it for nothing. And nowadays, so many, particularly now when everyone is stuck at home, there are people who will know about all these things and who should be able to take on one or more of these roles. And just don't be afraid to ask. You know, I discovered that my 17-year-old nephew, who's doing film studies at college in Devon, can make brilliant videos using his phone. So, you know, if you've got a son or daughter of a friend or grandchild or whatever living locally, ask around, find out what sort of people there are who can do things like that, because it's really easy and simple now to do this kind of stuff just with a phone. There are things where I think it is appropriate to pay more for professional skills, and that is especially with the offer document, because again, that comes back to, that's going to be the main document that people are going to rely on when they invest in your project, and it's got to be absolutely perfect. It's got to have no typos in it. It's got to look professional. It's got to look clear. You are asking people to give you thousands of pounds probably, so people have to be confident that they are going to be able to trust you with their money, and that really starts with your offer document. And it's always a good idea when you're setting your budget to look at the costs and go back against your objectives. And for example, you know, you might think it's really nice to have and someone might offer to make you a very expensive film, and you know, that would be a lovely thing to have, but would that money be better off spent, say, on social media or something else? You know, how is that going to, or advertising perhaps in local publications? You need to be absolutely sure that what you're spending money on is geared to your objectives. So, you know, it's got to relate to the amount of investment you think you're going to bring into the project. And then a little bit about earned versus unearned media, because I think a lot of people get a little bit confused about this. So earned media is what I do, which is PR and comms, and it's really about getting people talking about what you do, what you're offering, through all sorts of different channels, but primarily through the press. Unearned media is the money that you spend on advertising, where you have pretty much total control, because you know that, you know, if you want to get into a particular publication, if you take out an ad in that publication, then you know that it will be there in exactly the way that you want it to be expressed, and expressed in exactly the way you want it. So you have more control over that, but it feels a little bit less authentic. So it has lower value with readers, for example. You know, if they're reading some editorial, then the journalist might not write it exactly the way you want them to, but people might trust it a little bit more. So that's the end of the first section. Graham, are there any questions?
Yeah, we've had a few come in. First up, first question was just around how important it was to go national in terms of media reach, given the relatively small amount of equity that the different organisations are going to need to raise.
Right. Okay. I'd say national probably it's nice to have, but very difficult to get, particularly if you're using PR. And I'll come on to that a little bit more when I talk about PR strategy. And I certainly wouldn't be spending any money on national advertising. The best way to get your message across nationally is through Facebook advertising, because that's much cheaper. It can be very targeted and very focused. You could target a Facebook ad at all the Community Energy England members, for example, throughout the UK or something like that. And that's going to be a much better way of getting your message across there.
Okay, thanks, Sophie. I'm moving on to next one. There's a question around, it was, where's the sweet spot between a few investors putting up all the equity, which is presumably more simple to manage, versus everyone in the target community putting up £1? Is it mostly about money or mostly about community?
Well, I think that's a decision that the group has to make themselves. But if you go back to what I said, the average investment is about £2,000, but that will include some people who invest a minimum of, say, £250, and other people who might put in £20,000. So I think it's a decision that the groups have to make. But it's a community project. If you sell everything to 4 investors, it doesn't really feel like a community project to me.
Okay, thanks. And final one that we've got up in the chat box at the moment was around the, I think a few slides ago you had some a bullet point on offer document design, and the question is whether you mean whether that's specifically referring to graphic design as the
yes.
okay, yeah, as this person had seen.
And I'm gonna talk about that a little bit more later on.
Okay, great.
Yes.
That's everything in the chat box just now. I don't know if anyone else wanted to had any other questions they wanted covered at this point. Feel free to unmute yourselves and join in as well.
No.
I've got one, actually, if I may. It's Andrew here.
Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Very good indeed, Sophie. No, one of the things that we are pondering, where we very much like to do, is to do some of the sorts of graphics that, I'm just trying to remember what, it used to be Carbon Renewables or something like that, up in Bristol did, these beautiful pictures of bubbles of carbon dioxide over New York and Plymouth University and so on. And we're really keen on the idea of trying to get one of those where the bubbles are filling the Yelm estuary as a way of demonstrating what we're saving. They seem to be fairly impactful. What's your opinion?
I think it comes down to cost. So and how, if you can, it sounds to me like it's an animation that's probably quite expensive, and I think it's one of those things that would come on the nice to have list, but I'd have it probably quite low down on the list, because I think you need to get the fundamentals right first. It sounds like a lovely way of visualizing it. I'd also be looking to see if there are other materials already out there that you can use, for example, on YouTube. I mean, if you want to show carbon bubbles, it doesn't have to be going into the Yelm estuary. There may be other things that you can use instead, that someone else, the work has already been done.
Okay, thank you.
We've got one more that's come in. How are we doing on time, Sophie?
Yeah, okay, so I need to rattle through the next lot because I've spent quite a long time on the first bit. So
okay.
What's the other question? I'll try and answer it quickly.
Okay, how early in a project's development should it commit to building its supporters or audience?
Straight away, immediately. That's a quick one to answer. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, let's move on then.
Okay, so in this section, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to build a website. I think some of you have already got websites, and some of you have yet to go down that road. My recommendation is, first, don't pay a professional to do it yourselves. There are some amazingly easy to use website templates out there now. I built my own website using Squarespace, and I've built a couple of other community energy group websites using Squarespace. Website building is absolutely not one of my skills. I am terrible at anything techie, but I've managed to do it and make it look pretty good. I have said don't use WordPress, but if you already have a website that is built on WordPress because perhaps somebody in your group knows how to use WordPress really well, then that's fine. But WordPress is not much liked in the sort of professional design and comms community. Its functionality is a bit limited. But if you're starting from scratch, I'd recommend one of the Squarespace. There are others, there's Wix and Weebly, but Squarespace works really well and lends itself well to this. Don't try and do anything too complicated. Make sure you have good images, absolutely essential. A couple of things people don't know: you need to keep your sentences short, you need to keep the lines short. If you look on any thing on the internet, that for particularly journalism or any websites for big companies, you will see, even if you're looking at a massive screen, that the text is in the middle of the screen in quite short lines, and that's because it's much easier to read. And lots of people think that it makes things look professional if they justify the text. That's when you spread it out to fit between the two ends of the column. You don't do that. It's much harder to read on a screen. Important to remember that people can contact you, find your contact details easily on the website, and absolutely essential that you have a button on there that someone can click on to sign up and put in their email address and sign up, either register for newsletters or whatever, so that you capture their contact details straight away, because that's how you're going to start to build up your list of potential investors. Make sure that your website goes back to your social media. And finally, make sure that you keep it up to date, because nothing is, again, it's about presenting a professional look to the people that you're engaging with. And if it's clearly out of date, there are references to events that were supposed to happen at Christmas and we're now in the middle of June, then it just doesn't make you look very, very professional. So this is an example of a website that I really like, which is Southall Community Energy. This was built on Squarespace. They've used nice images. They've got a nice quote at the bottom from Jeremy Leggett, who's well known in the solar energy world. It's very very clear from this website that one of Southall's unique points is the biodiversity at the solar farm, which is not surprising because one of the people who behind the project is the leading ecologist in solar farms, Guy Parker, who used to live near Southall. So that's why it reflects very strongly the biodiversity. And obviously biodiversity is something that people think is really, really important at the moment. So it's another great way to engage people, not just about solar energy, but there's a biodiversity crisis too that we're helping to solve. And they've got a little gizmo in the middle that tells you what they're generating. And this is not live, but this is what it looked like when I put the slides together a week or so ago. And I know that Penny was interested in how easy it is to build embedded generation into your website. The answer is, it is possible on Squarespace. I think that they had a little bit of help doing this, but I think that the person who helped them is a community energy enthusiast who I'm sure would be able to help other community groups if they wanted to do this. But I'm not going to say who it is yet because I don't want to make promises that can't be kept. But it is a really nice thing to have in your website if you can get the data from the solar farm, of course. Then a little bit about social media. You absolutely must be on Facebook, Twitter. You, as individuals, you all need to be on LinkedIn, and you need to keep using these regularly. Instagram is appeals to a different demographic. It's quite a lot younger, and YouTube or Vimeo are both good for hosting videos. I won't spend too much time on this because I think that this is something that you can come back to at a later date. But one thing it is worth looking at is the analytics functions on Facebook and Twitter, which will tell you exactly how many people are engaging with what you put up, because sometimes it feels like you're firing stuff out and you can't tell, other than from retweets, how much interest you're actually generating. So this is an example of my own Twitter page from May. It tells me which tweet I got the most engagement with, tells me who my top follower is. So I'm quite flattered to be followed by someone who is involved with Tesla, not sure how, but what that tells me is that they've got 33,000 followers themselves. So if I can engage with that follower directly and get them to retweet what I'm talking about, then suddenly my message is going to go out to a much, much wider audience. And interestingly, one of the most popular tweets then was one that Yam Energy was involved in, and it was about sunrise over Stonehenge, which I just put out there because I thought it's, sunrise, quite a nice thing, relates a little bit to solar energy, but it got lots of engagement. So it also shows how important it is to have diverse content. This is Yam Community Energy's Twitter page. It's pretty good. You've got a nice photograph of the group at the top. You've got the logo. You've got a little profile description, which is quite good and quite engaging, and an interesting tweet at the top about biodiversity. It's really key that Twitter is regarded as having a two-way conversation. You need to engage with other people on Twitter, as well as putting your own stuff out there, and you need to be really active. The best way to get people to follow you is to keep active and to think of it as a conversation, and keep putting engaging content out there. If you're setting up from scratch, then get the content right first. Make sure you've got some interesting content there, and then start following other people, and they will follow you back. But they will look at your profile first to see if you're worth following. And that's why you need to have the content up there before you start following other people. It's very tempting to do it the other way around, but actually, if you think strategically, it's better to have some content up there first. And you should be aiming to build up your Twitter following to at least 500 people. And the sorts of people you can follow who might follow you back are local councillors, local journalists, other sort of high-profile local people, local businesses, further afield, other community energy groups, and so on. And following 100 different people isn't too many. It might seem like a lot, but if half of them follow you back, then that already helps to start to build your audience. Right, anybody got any questions now on website or social media?
We've got nothing in the chat box at the moment, but if anyone does have any, please.
Great, okay, good. I will move on then.
Sophie,
yes.
I've got a quick one. Do you think it's better to spread that work out, or to have one person who's concentrating on social media? So would you have one person in charge of website, somebody else doing Twitter, somebody else Facebook, or one person doing all three?
Good question. It depends what the skills are and the experience in your group. If you've got someone who's got the time and the commitment to stay on social media all the time, because you need to be putting stuff out there, 3 times a week probably, then that's fine. But it's also something that you could share between two or three other people. I find that I do run some social media accounts for some other clients, and because I'm active on social media myself, that helps, because I can, stuff that I'm interested in is often stuff that they would be interested in too, or that their followers would be interested in. So there's quite a lot of sort of cross-fertilization from that point of view. So that's a good approach to take. But yeah, I think if you've got someone, you might have someone who only wants to do the social media, and that's fine. But the important thing is that they all need to gel together. So if someone is putting something new on the website, for example, they need to make sure that the person doing the social media knows about it and puts it on social media. If you're sending out an e-newsletter or an email update to your subscribers, to your followers, then you absolutely need to make sure that you put the same information out on social media at the same time. So if it's not one person doing all three, which is then that way it's easy, then you need to make sure that you're all talking to each other.
Hi, Sophie, it's Ray Holland. Just had one question, because
Yeah.
we've resisted having a phone number on the website or anywhere else up to now, simply because we want to avoid nuisance calls. We already get quite a lot of nuisance emails, which are mostly filtered out. But how important do you think having a phone number is, so that people can phone in?
I think when you launch your share offer, it's really important, because for certain, it's about inclusivity, really. I mean, most people are happy to send an email with a question, but there might be some people who aren't comfortable with emails, and if someone's wants to make sure that you've got their investment or something, they need to be able to talk to a person. And if you think about it the other way around, if you're buying something online and something goes wrong with the transaction, how often have you gone to the website to try and phone them up about it? Happened to me all the last few months. I keep ordering things for the garden, and then they don't arrive, and you need to be able to find the phone number to find out what's happened to them. So I think it's quite important. I don't think you get that many spam calls. I mean, I have my phone number on my website. I don't get more than 1 or 2 spam phone calls a month. So I think, I don't think you need to worry too much about it. If you're really worried, you could set up a number that goes straight through to voicemail, and then just pick up the voicemail messages of the ones that you want to speak to. Anything else?
No, thanks very much.
Okay, so these are the key elements that you would have involved in a PR campaign, and I'm going to talk about them each one as we go through. So first of all, here are a couple of examples of good press coverage that you might get. So someone mentioned earlier in the webinar, what's the value of getting national media? Well, if you're very lucky, you'll get on the money page of The Guardian. But Rupert Jones is practically the only journalist who writes about community share offers, and he doesn't write about them all that often. But that's, that is a nice bit of free publicity that we managed to get for South Hill Solar. And we were lucky that we got him on a day when he was planning to do something, a bigger piece on community share offers and ethical investments and so on. But you're very unlikely to get one national journalist who's going to write a long piece just about your project. They have many other things that demand their attention. But there are other national media that are more targeted and focused, and one is Positive News, and this is a piece that we placed shortly after Brexit with John Halley writing a piece about how community energy was going to rise to the challenges in a post-Brexit world. Positive News is a good publication because it's absolutely targeting the sort of people who might invest in your project. So that's just a couple of examples of national press coverage that you might be aiming to get. Positive News is getting quite fussy actually about the sort of things that they cover, unless you spend money with them on advertising. So that is a different thing. You're much more likely to get good press coverage in your local media. And you need to pull up a good, or compile a good media list. Now you can buy a media list in, and people who will sell them to you for upwards for a few £100 to a couple of thousand. But I think for local media, it's just easier and better to research your own. Journalists' contact details are always published on the newspaper's website. You can see pretty easily who covers the sorts of things that you're interested in. So, for example, on this one, you would always have the news desk, which should be the first sort of filter for all press releases, and the editor, but then you might want to look at the particular person who covers your particular area. You might want to identify who the environment correspondent is, because obviously they're going to be quite interested in what you've got to offer. You might be interested, you should probably get the business editor on there as well, because it's an investment, it's a business. This is the way I do it. This is my bespoke list, which some people might recognize some of the names, but I have tried to edit it a little bit so as not to breach any GDPR guidelines. But I organize it by local newspapers and online, which are pretty much the same thing nowadays. The monthly magazines, very important and useful way of getting your message out there is through parish magazines and newsletters. And then I put the broadcast on there, so that's your local radio station, probably more than one station, local television, and so on. And I do one page for local media, and then a second page which would look at national media, which is, you know, the energy press, environment correspondence, and so on. But you know, it's work of a couple of hours to compile a list like this, and I find that Excel is the easiest format to do it in, and then make sure that as well as their email address, their name, you keep a record of their phone number, because you'll probably want to call them up at some point, their Twitter handle, and then any particular notes about them. For example, if somebody in the group knows one of the journalists personally, then you would want to make a note of that. So a news hook is really the thing that is going to get the journalist to write about your particular project. So in the run-up to your investment launches, there might be interesting things that you've done with community funds. If you've given money to a school that has built something new and you can get a photo op, probably not so much at the moment, but yeah, that is a really nice thing to have. We did some PR recently around the grants that everybody was advanced for responses to coronavirus. Didn't get quite as good a pickup as I would have expected for that, but I think that's because there's so much going on with coronavirus at the moment that it is pretty hard to cut through, and we did get some coverage, which is good. When you launch your offer, then obviously the fact that you are launching an investment, that is newsworthy in and of itself, and it's absolutely worth writing a press release about. When you've got halfway through to your target, it's another excuse to go back to press, and maybe when you're, you know, a week away from the offer closing, another reason to go back to press. And then you can also look for ways of putting a local angle on a national campaign. And so if the government says something that you've got an opinion about, then your local about, say, renewable energy or community energy, and it's Community Energy Fortnight, then you might offer to write an op-ed piece for your local paper or a blog or something like that. These are just the few facts that you need to keep in mind if you're writing a press release. Really important is to get your key messages in the press release, but those need to go in the quotes from directors of the project rather than in the actual body of the release. Otherwise, the newspaper will just edit them out, because they want to describe what's happening in the story, they want to describe the facts, but they don't. They're not going to say, well, this is a great project and we think everybody should invest in it, because then that's the journalist's voice. But they will quote you saying, this is a great project and we think everybody should invest in it. Then the formatting, you always show at the end where the press release ends, and then you have notes, and then very important that you have contact for the media, and really important that there are people around when you send out the press release for the next couple of days who will be able to answer any questions, because nothing is more frustrating for a journalist than if something's not clear in the press release and they can't actually get hold of anyone to answer their question. Photos are really, really important and helpful for selling a story. It is quite challenging to get nice, interesting photographs of solar projects. And I say they should always have either animals or people in. This is my local solar farm, taken on one of my early morning walks, and it's got sheep on it at the moment. Lots of people don't realise that you can have sheep on solar farms. We all know it, but a lot of people generally in the public don't know it. And this is great to go with a press release, but this would also be great for a social media post or whatever. But trying to find interesting photographs of solar farms and taking them on a sunny day with a blue sky in the background, and if it's not a blue sky, get someone to change it in Photoshop, because nobody wants to see a picture of solar panels if it's overcast and raining. It's just, it's not giving the message that you want. But good photographs really help to sell a story. And here's just some other examples of some other photographs that I like of solar farms. This is the exception that proves the rule, of course. This is not a bright sunny day, but it is a child clearing snow off rooftop solar panels, which is a really nice, unusual way of looking at it. And this is an image that is available for anyone to use. I think it's Balcombe Solar Farm, but it's Creative Commons. It's in the common usage, so anyone can download it and use it. This is a great photograph. It was taken at another project I worked on, and I think it says everything about all the good things about a solar farm. The sun's shining, it's a blue sky, you've got kids learning about solar energy, having a picnic in a field full of wildflowers. I mean, it's just a perfect photograph. But if all else fails, you could just try that. And that is a wind turbine in Wales, in Eteg, and the directors wanted to get some attention for the project, so they stripped down to their pants and took a photograph, and that got a lot of good attention. So I'm not suggesting that you all do that for your solar projects, though. Journalists, it can be quite scary. I have had the phone put down on me by a journalist on more than one occasion, but that tends to be some of the national energy correspondents, and I'm not going to name any names. Local journalists tend to be much nicer. They're often very young and quite inexperienced, and so it's quite easy to get them to, listen to what you want to say if you say it in an interesting way. But the important thing to remember is that most journalists get about 200 press releases a day. They will normally pick up the phone to you, but they are really, really busy. So don't waste time asking them how the weather is or if they're having a nice day. You just get straight to the point. And they don't like being asked if you got the press release, but if you say, I wanted to make sure that you're aware of this great project because I think it's right up your street and I have just sent you a press release, you will quite often get the answer, oh, I haven't seen that, and then you can give you an excuse to send it again. If you get questions from journalists, you have to get back to them really quickly. Nowadays, when everything is online, they can write a story based on the press release within 2 hours of getting the press release if they think it's good. If they can't get hold of you till the next day, then that's going to drop right down their list of priorities and they may not cover it at all. Make sure there is someone available to do follow-up questions and interviews when you send out a press release. And if you think it's going to, if it's a longer piece, if someone wants to do a long interview with you, if you think it might be difficult, then ask them to email the questions to you and reply to them by email. Much easier then to control what you say, because anything that you say to a journalist, unless you tell them it's not on the record, will be on the record. And I know people who've fallen into the pitfall of saying things that they didn't think the journalist would write, and then they wrote them and it made them look a bit silly and they regretted it afterwards. So just be aware that anything you say to a journalist is fair game, unless you specifically tell them it's not. And if you're worried about saying something wrong, it's fine to ask them to send you the questions by email. Just reply quickly. So any questions on the PR side? Graham?
Ooh, sorry, I need to unmute myself there. Nothing in the chat box as yet, so if anyone does have any, please just feel free to unmute yourselves and chip in.
Nope. Okay, I'll move on to the last bit. Newsletters. This is a really good way of keeping in contact with your supporters. And I think it's an essential communication channel for community energy groups. And I recommend MailChimp, which is what nearly everybody uses. It's free as long as you have fewer than 2,000 subscribers. Like websites, it's based on a template, so you can make your newsletter look really nice with your logo and a photograph of your project, which again should be consistent with your other brand guidelines and look similar to your website and so on. MailChimp takes care of the GDPR side of things. It's very good with social media, so that you can, anytime you send out a new newsletter, you can choose a setting so that it automatically posts it on Facebook or Twitter. And they have very good analytics, which will tell you how many people have opened your email, what stories they clicked on that were the most popular, and so on. I think it's important to stick to a regular schedule for contacting people, and I would suggest that you do it about once a month. Any more than that and it gets a bit intrusive and annoying, and I would wait and save up until you've got 2 or 3 interesting things that you want to tell people, and then put them all in one carefully crafted and well thought out newsletter, and try and stick to roughly the same time each month. So you might aim for the beginning of the month, the middle of the month, the end of the month, you know, the 3rd Tuesday, whatever. But if you've got a plan, you can stick to it. Sometimes people think that they haven't got any new information to send out, but there's always something that you can find. You can talk about the performance of the solar farm. You can make a reference to the bigger news agenda, you know, what's happening in renewable energy, how is the community responding to coronavirus, so on. The other important thing that newsletters have to have in them is some sort of call to action, which is often links that will get people to go back to your website and read more stuff. And the beauty about newsletters is I would always include in them an option to sign up through the newsletter to follow people on Facebook and Twitter, and invite people to share the newsletter with other people that you think might be interested in the stuff that you're talking about in the newsletter. And you can also use your newsletter to do a survey of your readers, and there's a great tool that I'm sure you've probably all participated in, SurveyMonkey surveys. So it's a great way of engaging with people, finding out what they're thinking about, what their priorities are, and people love filling in surveys if they don't take too long. So you could, you could ask people what their views are about certain types, renewable energy legislation. Have they invested in community energy before? find out, if they're thinking of investing, questions like that, or if they've got particular skills, or what sort of things they'd like to hear from you about. And then you can follow up with them. If you do a survey, really useful to include a free text box. So as well as having the options for people to text, for people to tick, have a question at the end which is left blank, and then people can type in what they want. And it's a very good way of learning what other people in your target community are interested in and getting some ideas. The share offer document, or bond offer document, investment offer document, is absolutely critical, because if it's not good, you're not going to get the investors. So all the other PR and comms is really about getting people to the point where they're ready to invest in your project, and they get a copy of the offer document, or they download it from your website, and then it's got to be really, really engaging. So you will be getting, I think, from Core a copy of the bond prospectus that they are producing for the community bond, which is regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. So it should have all the right information and the right language in there, which you can use as a basis for your individual offer documents. And then you really want to make it your own. So you need to use it as a way of communicating what your values and vision are that you want to achieve through your investment offer. The story of the project, make sure you include those all important key messages. It's a financial document, so it needs to be really clear and easy to understand, and use simple language. And don't assume that the people reading it will know, some of the financial terms that you take for granted. One of the really common mistakes I see people making with offer documents is they're talking about the return on the investment, and they forget to say that it's an annual return. So, you might a return of 4% for 20 years. Well, people look at that and think, well, that's not very good. But if they know it's 4% annual return, then that's different. It's always good to pull out the benefits of the investment clearly up front. And although unless you're working with abundance, it's probably not going to be Financial Conduct Authority registered investment, it's still important that you make it fair, clear, and not misleading. Another thing to think about is whether you really need to go to the expense of having it printed, or whether you just do an online document only. You can get a designer to produce a really great PDF that can be emailed to people. Most people anyway read stuff like this on their screens. You don't necessarily need to have a paper printed document, but you particularly now when it's difficult to organize meetings when everyone gets together in one place and you would hand them out. So that can be quite a useful way of saving money, is just make it online only, or you may only print out 50 copies, because most people will download it from the website and read it on their screens. There might be a few people who would really want a paper copy. And this is where someone mentioned earlier about design. I'm talking about graphic design. Really, really worth getting a professional person to do this who knows what they're doing. So they'll take your brand guidelines, they'll take the great images that you've already got, because those are so important, and they'll make it clear and easy to follow. You can't produce a professional looking offer document at home using Microsoft Word. You really can't. You need special software that professional designers have and know how to use. And I think it's really important to have some of your budget allocated to professional design costs. There are so many great freelance designers working from home. Their rates are really reasonable, and it's a no-brainer, in my view. Then there are various other ways you can communicate and engage with people about your project. Is it worth having a launch event with a speaker? With wine and cheese in a nice building? Well, at the moment it's impossible. But should things change, is it worth organising, spending money on? I think it very much depends on your local community. If you can get someone to lend you an engaging space and perhaps get an interesting speaker to come along that people would want to listen to, and maybe get somebody to supply the wine for free in return for a bit of publicity, then it can be a good thing to do. But I've also been to some really quite depressing community share offer launches in a village hall where, you know, a dozen people showed up, and it doesn't really build confidence. So I think it's something that you have to, you know, evaluate on an individual basis. Then there's getting out and about to other community events, having stalls at village fetes, at agricultural fairs and so on. Well, again, none of these are happening. So we've really got to make the most of digital communications at the moment. And that's why it comes back to social media being absolutely critical part of this, because that, you know, that's the substitute now for the, you know, for the farmers market, or, you know, well, I think farmers markets probably are allowed to operate now, but for the village fair or whatever, you know, find out if you don't know about it already, has your village got a Facebook page? Make sure that you're engaging with the people who run the village Facebook page so that they know about what you're doing. Where I live in Caen, in Wiltshire, we've got 2 community Facebook pages, and they've got one's got 20,000 followers and the other's got 15,000 followers. It's a fantastic way of getting information out there, and that's more than the population of the town. You know, it's really, really, really good way to engage with people. Then other things like making a film about the project, that's a really good way to get across what you're about succinctly. It's nice for people to hear the directors of the project speaking, because it helps to build trust and so on. And it's quite easy to do now with a mobile phone. If you need someone who knows a little bit about editing, but, you know, think about what you want to say, get someone to come and do interviews with two or three of the members of the community energy group, splice together some sound bites from the interviews with some nice pictures of the solar farm, and really important, don't make it too long. I would say 2 minutes is okay, 1 minute is better, because people really don't have patience for sitting through anything that is too long. But it's a good way of, you put it on your website, you share it on social media. It's a useful way to get the message out there. But it's not something that you don't need to hire a professional company to produce a nice little film for you. It's something that you should be able to do quite easily within the community. And again, ask your children and your grandchildren who they know who can do it, because I bet, you know, they're all making TikTok videos now. They can apply those skills to help you make a nice, effective video for your community energy project. Posters and leaflets, again, quite useful to have. Cost a bit of money to print. Leaflets, maybe not sure if you need leaflets as well as printed share offer documents, but quite good maybe to get the message out to people who you might not be able to communicate with through online channels. Just again, the important thing is to make them simple, make sure that they reflect your branding, and you know, that the messaging is consistent. Pledging is a really good thing that you can start to thinking about doing, and I know that I got an email from Yam today saying that asking me how much money I might be wanting to invest. And it's a good idea to communicate with your supporters to get an idea ahead of time what sort of interest is out there. And this is something that some of the crowdfunding sites use a lot. Like Seedrs, for example, usually by the time a project is launched on Seedrs, they've already figured out that they're going to hit the target within a week of the investment going live, because they've already done a lot of homework to find out who wants to invest. It needs to have a really, so this is a great example from Low Carbon Hub, who you all know. It's got a really nice, clear message: join over 1,000 investors and put your money to work tackling climate change. There's a totalizer, so you can see that other people are doing it, and then there's a button to press that says, that takes you to a page where you can say how much you'd be prepared to invest, and it's got a nice quote at the bottom. So this is something that's definitely worth thinking about. And again, you don't just want to email it to your supporters. It's something that you can put on social media and so on, as a way of getting the message out there to a much wider audience, but a good way of getting an indication of how much money you're likely to be able to raise. And then we're almost at the end now. There's still some time left for questions. Obviously, we'd all be very happy to help you afterwards with any specific things that might come up as a result of what I've been talking about today. Things that I often do for community energy groups is I do an overall review of all their communications, particularly the website. I review the offer document to make sure that it's clear and tells the story in the right way. I can help you pull together a PR strategy, write press releases, issue them. If you don't want to do it yourselves, you might have someone locally who can do it anyway, but if you don't have those local skills, then those are all things that I can help you with. For more stuff, but my approach to social media is quite sort of high level, but for more detailed social media strategy, then CSE can help you with that, and also with Facebook advertising and other forms of marketing. And then we're also very happy to work with you on a one-to-one basis in this sort of format, at least until such a time as we can meet face to face, to go through whatever specific thing you might want to discuss. So that's it. Thank you. And then I think we've got still some time left for some more questions. Graham, any more questions?
Oh, hello. Can you?
Hi.
Hi, great. Sorry, I was having some issues getting myself off mute there. Thanks very much, Sophie. That was great. We've got no immediate questions in the chat box. I don't know if anyone has anything else they'd like to chip in with. If so, please do go ahead.
Nothing.
Nothing. Looks like we're all covered. We've had a yeah, that's it at the moment. We've had some. I'm just gonna have a look back through and double check I didn't miss anyone earlier.
Well, if anyone wants to get back to me after this, I'm more than happy. My email address is there, my phone number's there. I'm more than happy to if you think of something later that you would like some help and advice on, then please let me know.
Hello, Graham and Sophie.
Yes.
I have sent a message earlier just to say how excellent your presentation is. I find it really, really helpful, and I'm sure we'll look to put it into practice. So thank you very, very much indeed.
Oh, well, I'm really pleased to hear that. Thank you.
People are writing the same thing in different messages rather than saying it out loud, Sophie.
Okay, thanks. I can't see the chat, so I don't know what people are saying.
I'll make sure to forward it on to you, Sophie.
Great. Thank you, Graham.
Sophie, do you have a sort of, if you're a new group, sort of where would you suggest beginning? Do you do sort of a comms and PR like plan or strategy before you sort of embark on your Twitter and your websites, or?
Yes, I'd start with a strategy. Well, I'd get a website set up and the social media set up straight away, and then but you can't really write the content for a website until you've decided what your key messages are. So, but of course, the beauty about a website is you can change it. So I'd get the basics set up, and then put a little bit more thought into, what the messages are and how you want to present it to everybody. But yeah, website, Facebook, Twitter, those are the three things to start with.
Thanks, Sophie. And do you have like a template or something that people could use to start populating as a plan?
What, for the website?
For a communications plan.
For a communications plan, no, but I could probably share the one that I did for YAM Community Energy a while ago, if they don't mind, or I could just share the headings that I use for a communications plan, which are pretty much the headings that we saw on one of the slides at the beginning of the presentation.
That's fine with us.
Okay, good. Thank you, Ray.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, Ray. Yeah, that was really useful, and yeah, great webinar. Thanks very much, Sophie.
Okay, well, good. Everyone can go and have 10 minutes in the garden now.